Political science is an interesting subject when we talk about political parties. Indeed, political science stands incomplete without the knowledge of political parties. So, knowing about political parties is equally important. Now, why we do have different political parties? That is a very common question we would begin with. The simple idea and the simple logic is all these political parties have certain basic ideologies. Now, there are certain number of people who would follow a certain ideology and therefore they would be inclined towards one political party. The other segment of the population would have certain ideologies in mind and therefore they would be inclined towards other political party. So the basic thing which is the backdrop behind any political party or any political structure, we could say, is the ideology that underlies the formation of that party. Again, one very interesting thing is when we have elections, we do sometimes feel that whatever party comes into power does not matter because what would be the fate of the common people? Now, this is a very big question that is of concern. I take a very simple example. Let's say there are two buffaloes fighting on the ground. What would happen? When two buffaloes fight on the ground, ultimately the grass beneath gets crushed. And the same happens when different political parties try to prove their point over a certain issue. Now, when different political parties try to prove their point over a certain issue, the ultimate sufferer is who? The ultimate sufferer is the poor people. And that is what needs to be revamped in any political structure. So in this section, we would understand how after independence, there was an era of one party dominance, but the situation in India, even with one party dominance, was very different from other countries. The sole reason being, this one party dominance was a dominance in a case which was a democratic structure. Since it was a democratic structure, there was always the voice of the opposition. Now, this voice of the opposition led the ruling party to work on the right issues, and this has kept the spirit of democracy alive so far. So, to begin with, I have another important question with you. We got independent in 1947. The idea of writing the constitution was finally started after it, and then signed in 1947. Finally, our constitution came into power in 1950. Again, 1950 was the year that election commission was formed. Now, I have another question. Why it was so that election commission was formed in 1950? Despite of that, the first general election in India took place in 1952. Why 2 years of lag was there? Now, this is a very important question to understand. The idea was when our country got independent, we had a very low proportion of literate population, which was only 15% population that was literate. That means if we want to conduct an election for a population that was predominantly illiterate, there has to be an alternate means through which election could be conducted. That was one important cause of concern. The second important cause of concern so far was that there were 40 lakh women who were not registered as a voter. They were either registered as wife of or daughter of. Now, when election commission got this thing into vigilance, they thought of removing this issue and moved towards the idea of universal adult franchise, which gives equal right to all to vote. That means these 40 lakh women must be included, their names must be included in the system. So there was this period and this delay of nearly 2 years that took place. The another important reason was to conduct election across the length and breadth of country like India was a difficult task. That means there was an instant need to draw boundaries, delimitate the constituencies. So delimitation was another important concern that was raised. And besides all this, improving the participation and finally testing it into a country where a huge number of population was illiterate was a big challenge in itself. So, this became a tedious task. It took nearly 6 months to actually complete the process of campaigning, polling and counting, and finally the result declaration for election commission in the very first round of election. Now, the basic idea that we understand in this political structure was what? The idea was to maintain the democracy that we have achieved after independence. By any means, the spirit of independence should not go back, and this politics should always serve as a path to solve the current base level, ground level problems in the system of democracy. So the ultimate objective was what? The ultimate objective was public interest, doing things for the betterment of public. Now, when I say doing things for the betterment of public, two important things. One was competition, the other was power. These two were the most visible things in any political structure across the globe during that time. But India's case was a very different case. So far, only the developed nations like North America, Europe, where high number of literate population was seen, had the system of democracy and election. India became one of the leading countries to have a free and fair general election in 1952 with only 15% literate population. That was a record in itself. At that time, there were nearly 17 crore eligible voters who were there to vote, nearly 3,200 MLAs to be elected, and 489 members for Lok Sabha to be elected. So that was a tedious task in itself. Also, if we go to the scenario in other countries, even the time when India had its first general election, even at that point of time, countries in Europe were not allowing females to vote. And India became a leading example of universal adult franchise, which gives every individual right to vote who is in the category of eligibility to right to vote. The next is one of the leading newspapers, and the editor of that newspaper said that this could be a tedious exercise and it could turn out to be the biggest gamble in the Indian history. However, there were another newspapers who were saying that this is the point when the leading leaders of the nation must confess that this idea of universal adult franchise would come out to be the biggest failure of their time. However, there were other segments and other group of population and newspapers who were citing that this would be a step towards an enlightened and a bright future for India. So there were divisions over ideas, divisions over ideologies, but ultimately this election took place in 1952, a very unique election which went on for nearly 6 months with campaigning, polling, counting. The election was highly competitive. You must wonder that at that time, at every seat, there were around 4 people who were contesting the election. That means there was a spirit, there was a liveliness. More than 50% of the voters who were eligible to vote turned out to vote. So that was again a successful count, we could say, in itself. And even those who lost the elections believed that the elections were very fair. So this marked the system of the unique process of elections being held in India in a free and fair form. And this was very important to understand because this was the time that it actually began somewhere towards the end of 1951, but most of the election in most of the states took place in 1952 January, and therefore it is called as the general elections of 1952. However, it has started from towards the end of 1951 and ended in 1952. This first general election was again unique. Nowadays, we talk about electronic voting machine. Do you think 70 years down the lane, was this the same process? No. At that time, we did not had electronic voting machine. Even the first and the second elections were very unique in terms of how the polling took place. Since a large segment of the society was illiterate, what was required was to make election in such a way that even a common man can cast their vote without having the knowledge to read and write. To keep that in mind, in the first two elections, what was held? There were more than 20 lakh steel boxes which were created, and on each of the box, there were names of the logos, the symbols of the political parties that were placed. So let's say I want to cast vote to political party A, you want to cast vote to political party B. Let's say the sign of political party A is hand and the sign of political party B is flower. Now, since I am illiterate, I can understand what is hand and what is a flower. I'll see the photos which are put onto the steel boxes and put my paper in that box. Now, when I put my paper in that box, ultimately the number of the papers in each respective boxes were counted. So, this was the process in the first two general election. However, the things changed from third general election. From third general election to 13th general election. So note, the election takes place every 5 years. Despite there could be scenario when there is a constitutional breakdown or the ruling party dissolves. In that case, the election could take place early or in case of emergency situation. But otherwise, we take a tenure of 5 years. Now from the 3rd to the 13th general election, ballot papers were introduced. So what were these ballot papers? Ballot papers, as you can see here, was the list where you had the name of the political party, symbol of the political party, name of the political party, symbol of the political party, and you had to mark whatever you think is correct now or whatever you want to go for. Once you mark it, you fold that ballot paper, put it into a single steel box. So, from the 3rd to the 13th elections, there was one single box that was put and that was called as a ballot box. However, in the first and the second elections, the scenario was different. After the 13th general election, towards the end of 1990s, Election Commission introduced the concept of electronic voting machine. In the initial rollout, this was brought out in the specific areas, but later on, this is spread to the entire country, and in 2004 all the elections throughout the country started on electronic voting machine. So what happens in an electronic voting machine? You have the name, you have the symbol, and then what you have to press is the button in front of that. So it would sound beep and that's done. Now along with that, in the recent versions you have the VVPAT, which is the audit trail that says a piece of paper with your whatever you have marked for the political party would roll, and this roll would keep on accumulating. So in case of any confusion, that could be cross-checked for double verification. So that's the purpose of it. But this is how the voting methods changed. Now, what we need to understand is what was the situation in the first three general elections. As you can see into this graph, this was a situation where whole of the India was predominantly under Congress. In the 1952 to 67 period, whole of the North India as well as the South India was under Congress dominance. From 1957, Communist Party came in Kerala. And this was the first time in India, first time in the history that Communist Party in Kerala came up in democratic elections. So the importance of this Communist Party coming up here was such important because this Communist Party came up in a democratic election where people voted for Communist Party to come into existence. So again, this was a very important step. As we could see the graphs of the 3 elections here, so this is the first Lok Sabha election, second Lok Sabha election and third Lok Sabha election. In each of the Lok Sabha elections, we could say that Congress achieved an exceptional majority with 364, 371 and 361 seats in each of the general elections. So it was a clear era of one party dominance in India. Now, Congress Party, popularly known during that time, had an inherited legacy. Congress started in 1885, right, as Indian National Congress. Now, with the formation of Indian National Congress, if we go back to the history then, it was a segment of elite, educated, business group and professionals who started their own ideologies together. And this was the basis for Congress formation. Now, this basis for Congress formation went on for years, but slowly this party actually started to absorb people from different streams. So, agriculturalists, rural people, landlords, peasants, rich, poor, people across every caste, gender, religion came into one umbrella net. So the idea was this party initially, which started with an inherited legacy, was now bringing in people and was absorbing, or we could say was a coalition of social and ideological confluence. So anyone from any background absorbed into the system, anyone from different ideology absorbed into the system. And this was the way party started to grow. During the time of first general election, 1952, out of the total seats, 364 seats were won by Congress, and it was only 16 seats that were won by the Communist Party of India. That means Congress had a pure majority. However, this was not the case in the term of vote share. We'll come to it in a while. We'll just have a recap of the first past the post election to give you a better understanding of it. But despite of all this, Congress maintained 3/4 of the winning seats. Now 3/4 of the seats were maintained, and every 1/10 number of the seats were actually taken into account by any other party. So the most important seats, we could say, the major proportion of the seat was taken into by Congress in each constituency. So it was not just at the national level but also at the state assembly elections. So Congress performed at that time excellently at the national level as well as the state level elections. Even in the state level elections, different people from different parties came into existence, but ultimately the leading party was Congress during that time, with the exception of few areas of Madras presidencies, Kerala. We had seen that most of the regions Congress came into existence, and even in these areas where other parties were dominant, Congress was able to form the government. So ultimately, throughout India, the government was formed by the Congress during that time. Now, what was the first past the post system? Now, first past the post system says that in a country, when you have one party, if it gets more number of votes than any other party, okay, that party becomes a ruling party. Now, what would be the vote share in terms of proportional share? I take a very simple example. We say that every 3 of the 4 seats was won by Congress. Now, when I say every 3 of the 4 seats was won by Congress, the interesting figure was, in the terms of vote share, it was not even 50% vote share for the Congress, but still 3 of the 4 seats came to Congress. Why? Because of this first past the post system. That means the other parties who were getting the votes, their votes were divided within themselves. So it was not just one other political party, but 2-3 other political parties in which the vote share was divided. And since the vote share was divided into other political parties, Congress became the leading party. So despite the fact that Congress got less than 50% of the vote share, Congress turned out to be one of the ruling parties in 3 of the every 4 seats. Very important concept, must to know, and that is only because of the existence of the first past the post system that exists in India. So the votes that were divided among other parties who did not came to power. So if there were, I take another example, if there were just by party system, okay, party 1 and party 2, party 1 gets less than 50% vote, so automatically party B gets more than 50%, so party B would get a seat. However, in this case, it is not just party B, but it is party B plus C plus D. Now together they got around 50% vote. So none of them got a vote share which was higher than the vote share of party A, and therefore party A would come to power despite the fact that in reality it gets less than 50% of the vote share. And this is what is the basis for the first past the post election. Now the second party next to Congress during that time was the Socialist Party. Now, Socialist Party has numerous bifurcations that we can see as of now. We'll come to the various political parties in a while, but the idea I'm trying to let you understand here for the first past the post system was the second largest party in terms of vote share was Socialist Party. Socialist Party got around more than 10% of the vote share, but it could not even win 3% of the total seats. So of the total 489 seats, it could win just 3% of the seats. That was a very meager amount of seats, and that was because of the division of votes, as we said, between the various political parties that came into existence. Now, as I mentioned, the Communist Party and its creation in Kerala in 1957 election was a leading milestone. Why it was a leading milestone? Because it was for the first time that a Communist Party came into ruling by democratic elections, and this was extremely important in light of the existing scenario in India, where at that time there was an era of one party dominance. So this effort of Communist Party of India was extremely important. The governor during that time asked the leader of the Communist Party of Kerala, EMS Namboothiripan, to actually come and bring the Communist Party into power in Kerala. Now, as the Communist Party came into power in Kerala, there was a liberation struggle which started with Congress, because Congress felt that this is a point that Congress might be losing grounds on. So, there was a liberation struggle which was started by the leaders of Congress, and they started to take progressive radical measures to actually bring in agitation. There were various religious organizations which were involved into this act during that time. In 1959, Congress government dismissed the Communist Party of Kerala under the Article 356 of the Constitution. Now, this decision brought by Congress was considered controversial, and it was cited as the very first example of misuse of the power of constitutional emergency. So this time when Congress wanted to dismiss the Communist Party in Kerala, they brought in Article 356, which is one of the emergency articles, and this was considered as controversial because it was considered as the first misuse of the power of the constitutional emergency power, right? Now, before we go further into it, in brief, we would talk about some other parties that were into existence and into picture at that time, and what were the basis behind these parties. So Congress we had already started with. The next important party was Communist Party of India. Now Communist Party of India with its branch as Communist Party of Kerala. Now what was the ideology? The ideology of this party was simple, a democratic socialism. So it criticized Congress for favoring the capitalist, it criticized Congress for favoring the landlords, and it also criticized Congress for ignoring the rights of the peasants, the working class, and the workers at factory. Now, in 1920, when the communist group actually came into existence, what was the inspiration? The inspiration was Bolshevik Revolution, which took place in Russia, and this Bolshevik Revolution advocated the concepts of socialism to solve the problem. In 1935, the communist workers mainly were working within the fold of Indian National Congress in India. However, they started to part away from Congress in 1941 and they transferred to an independent party after independence in 1947. Now, initially, this party took a path of violence. So, there were violent uprisings in Telangana. However, in 1951, the party realized that this violent uprisings would not be a right way to move into or approach the general elections, and therefore they quit the path of violent methods that were used and decided to approach the election in a normal way. So in the first general election, 16 seats were won by the Communist Party of India. Some of the major leaders of Communist Party of India, EMS Namboothiri Pant from Kerala, who was called by the governor of Kerala. Then we have A.K. Gopalan, S.A. Dhange, Ajay Ghosh, P.C. Joshi as some of the important leaders. Later, Communist Party of India bifurcated into two. One was the CPI, which was with the ideologies of Russia, following the ideas of Bolshevik Revolution. The other party opposed it, and this was in the name of CPIM, that is CPI, Communist Party of India, Marxist. Now this segment of population opposed the ideas of being pro-Soviet Union. The next important party that came into existence was the Socialist Party. Now the Socialist Party, just ignore this, sorry, this has been repeated from the last slide. Okay, so Socialist Party was within the party of Congress in 1934. It was known as the Congress Socialist Party. It parted away from the Congress Socialist Party, and in 1948, Congress amended to prevent the dual party membership. So, people should either be the member of Socialist Party or should be the member of the Communist Party. So, there were four separations between the Socialist Party and the Congress Party. And finally, initially, the Socialist Party got a lot of disappointment because it did not have strong followers, we could say, and they were actually limited in number. Some of the important leaders, we could say, were Ashok Mehta, Acharya Narendra Dev, Ram Manohar Lohia, a very leading personality. We'll talk about major contributors from each of the sections later towards the end of this class. So, Ram Manohar Lohia, Ashok Mehta, Acharya Narendra Dev, some of the leading members of Socialist Party. Later, the present-day Socialist Party fragments that we see. So, if we talk about Samajwadi Party, Janata Dal, Rashtriya Janata Dal, Janata Dal Secular, all of these we can say have originated from which party? Originated from the Socialist Party. So, Socialist Party had an idea of keeping distance from Congress, establishing things for the betterment of the society and the common people, and limiting themselves with the involvement of Congress. The next was Bharatiya Jan Sangh. Now, Bharatiya Jan Sangh was formed in 1951 under Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, a very eminent personality of that time, who believed into one simple logic: one nation, one culture, one ideology. So, one country, one nation, one culture, one ideology, and the concept of Akhand Bharat. That means there should not be any separate India and Pakistan. Everything should be under one umbrella net, and this was called as the Akhand Bharat. This lineage later turned out to be known as RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, from which BJP in the present scenario originated. So this party was in the forefront to actually start agitations against English and convert Hindi as an official language, to bring forward Hindi as an official language, to focus on and grant concessions to cultural minorities, to religious minorities was opposed by this party. There should not be any kind of concessions which should be given on religious minority grounds or cultural minority grounds, and this party also advocated use of nuclear weapons when China actually carried out the nuclear test in 1964. At that time, it was said that it's important that we should be nuclear capable nation. Okay. However, in 1950, Jan Sangh was a very small party with just 3 seats that it got in the Lok Sabha elections of the 489 seats in the 1952 election. However, in the 1957 elections, the thing don't change much, and the party got just 4 seats out of the total number of increased 494 seats during that time. Some of the prominent leaders of Bharatiya Jan Sangh during that time were Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, and Balraj Modak. The next is Swatantrata Party. Now, Swatantrata Party was formed a little later in 1959. This party was formed after the Nagpur resolution of Congress, and it focused on cooperative aspects. So it talked about cooperative farming, it talked about a strategy which should keep the base for socialism high, include cooperative farming, cooperative practices, and it also opposed the tax regimes which were there in the society. It also opposed the licensing system and focused on a policy of actually having good relations with Soviet Union as well as United States, and opposing any kind of things which were pro-capitalist. So this was called as the Swatantrata Party. Now, under the Swatantrata Party, some of the important leaders were K.M. Munshi and C. Rajgopalacharya, two of the very important prominent personalities under Swatantrata Party. However, there was a class of people, mainly the industrialists, mainly the businessmen, who were against the licensing policies, against the nationalization, and they supported this party. So this Swatantrata Party was actually, initially it was not that strong, but slowly it started to have a good hold among a segment of the population. Now, a very important thing that we need to understand. We are so far saying that through the first 3 general elections, Congress was a dominant party. But the case of Congress dominance in India was very different from other political parties worldwide. Why I am saying so, we'll understand with a simple example. Now, if we talk about countries like China, Cuba, Syria, they all had a single party rule. Clear? There were other segments of countries like Myanmar, Belarus, Egypt, countries like Eritrea, all of them again had one party, but that was mainly because of legal and military reasons. Again, there was another segment of countries which was Mexico, South Korea, and Taiwan. They did had one party prominence, but the case was little different. We'll understand in a while. Now, China, Cuba, Syria, just one party. Myanmar, Belarus, Egypt, Eritrea, one party due to legal and military reasons. Mexico, South Korea, and Taiwan. Now, Mexico, will take one as a case study here. Mexico had National Revolutionary Party. This was later called as Institutional Revolutionary Party. In Spanish, it was called as PRI. Now, this party was there for nearly, we can say 60 years or 6 decades. This party was the one very important party in that region, but it was not on an authentic ground. Why? Because it was manipulating the electoral processes, it was rigging the elections, and finally the elections results were so that ultimately the National Revolutionary Party came into power every time. Okay, so this party was, despite the fact that there was a system of elections that was there. This party was into power, but it was mainly because of, we could say, unhealthy practices where there was dominance of this party, rigging of election and manipulations, we could say, by the ruling party was one of the reasons. This continued till 2000, very recent. And then this was the reason that Mexico had one party dominance. But in India, when we are saying Congress was a dominant party, this was not the case. Congress remained a dominant party despite of the free and fair elections under Election Commission. So that is the key thing. The second important key thing that we need to understand here is the fact that Congress was in power under a democratic regime. So India was a democratic nation, and under this democratic regime, Congress remained into power. As I previously cited, Congress was a platform for coalition, a social and ideological coalition. So peasants, industrialists coming together, urban, rural dwellers coming together, agriculturalists, industrialists coming together, middle class, lower class, upper class workers all coming together into a party system, getting absorbed into the party, which initially started with the legacy of the educated professional business class elite system, the English speaking upper caste during the time it was formed, to a platform where it absorbed all strata, all segments, irrespective of the gender, caste, color, creed, and accommodated the revolutionary as well as the pacifist approach, the extremist as well as the moderate approach, and therefore it brought a platform for all political parties to merge. The another important thing is the idea of tolerance. That was very important. Now, the idea of tolerance is so important when we talk about Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru was a leader from Congress. He invited J.P. Narayan to give his views, who was a pro-socialist during that time. And this was a live example that when the political conflicts or political differences were not that intense, people from across parties who were excellent in their field were called for improvement of the nation. So that was itself a remarkable idea which we can say and cite for the concepts of toleration and management under Congress. Now, within the ruling party, which was Congress during that time, there were various small fragments, and these fragments are called as factions. Factions are a little variation and a deviation from the existing party that exists. We call this not as fraction but as factions, right? Now, two important things. One was, as I mentioned, it was a coalition which accommodated one and all. So there was an idea of compromise. Let everyone come into account. The second was the idea of inclusiveness, making sure every segment of the population gets representation. The second important thing that was a basic idea under the Congress party was the thing that party had a very high tolerance even for internal differences that existed within the party. So any internal differences within the party members, there was a very good amount of tolerance. The party would allow people to represent their views, and therefore this was one of the reasons that it remained into power for 3 consecutive general elections. These factions which started to grow within the party were later on deep-rooted by the oppositions. So those who opposed the Congress party actually deep-rooted the factions which were present within the Congress. So some people who were had a little different ideology. Their ideologies were made more different by the people who oppose the political parties, and therefore this system actually led way to emergence of the opposition party. Now this opposition parties, when came into existence, why we say they are important? We saw that Bharatiya Janata Sangh got only 3 seats in the first general election. Communist Party got only 16 seats in the first general election, but still their role is important. Why? The idea is to keep the spirit of democracy alive, to ensure that there is a free and fair general election, to ensure that this democracy does not turn out into a dictatorship. So all those are maintained by whom? By the opposition. So as those who were in the factions of Congress, their ideologies got deep-rooted. So moving from Congress, they started to move towards non-Congress, and they started to form or join other independent political parties. So these independent political parties later gained representation in Lok Sabha over the years. But initially, it was not the case. As I mentioned, in the first general election, even the opposition leaders like Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had leading role. As we mentioned, Jawaharlal Nehru invited J.P. Narayan, who was from a socialist party, and all of them were working towards one common objective for the betterment of the country and for solving the problems of the nation. However, this differences later intensified and later turned out into a different picture. Now, once we have understood all this, let's talk about some of the important leaders and their contribution during that time. So, R.A. Kidwai was a leader of Congress from Uttar Pradesh, became the first Minister of Communication in Free India. So, Minister of Communication in Free India and later Food and Agriculture, has a very important role in Indian history and the upliftment of the concepts. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, as we all know, was the father of Constituent Assembly, and he was a founder of Independent Labour Party. Idea under him were laid down for the upliftment of the Dalit, and he also adopted the code for Hindu bill, code for Buddhism in the parliament. The next was Acharya Narendra Dev. Acharya Narendra Dev was the founding father for the Congress Socialist Party. He was jailed numerous times during the freedom struggle, and he was a scholar of Buddhism. He remained as a Minister of Health till 1957 and later propounded with the Socialist Party. We have Rajkumari Amrit Kaur. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur was the Health Minister of India, and she was the Health Minister under the first Assembly election. So, the first Health Minister of India, we can say, after India got independent, and continued till 1957. Her contributions are again noted. She initially belonged to a royal elite family, but played a major role in the upliftment of the healthcare system, which was totally crumbled during the time of independence. Then we have Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad. He was a freedom fighter, a strong proponent of Hindu-Muslim unity, opposed partition of India, and was one of the major leaders. Again, under Free India, was the first education minister. So, the first education minister of Free India, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad. We talk about A.K. Gopalan. A.K. Gopalan was a communist leader from Kerala along with Namboodiripad, Pad, and he actually was one who joined the Communist Party of India, later split the Communist Party of India into Communist Party and the Communist Party M, which is CPI and CPI M, Marxist. C. Rajgopalacharya, the contribution of C. Rajgopalacharya are well known, a close associate of Mahatma Gandhi, a very known literary figure, and was the first Indian to be the Governor General of India. He was also the recipient of the first Bharat Ratna Award. So again his contributions are noted, and later C. Rajgopalacharya founded the Swatantrata Party in 1959 that we discussed. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee founded the Bharatiya Jansangh with a very meager representation during the first two general elections. The idea was to actually move forward towards an idea of Akhand Bharat and opposed the India's policy for autonomy of Jammu Kashmir. And he actually was detained, and finally he lost his life during the time of detention. So this was these were some of the major leaders and contributors towards the formation of the free India and the development of India after independence. So in this section we have mainly focused on how a one party dominance picture was seen. In the coming classes, we would see the changing structure of India's political regime over the history and the present day scenario. So stay tuned for more NCERTs. Have a wonderful day ahead.